content. Hello, I'm Ann Rolfe and welcome to our webinar, Advanced Mentoring Skills, Be Slow to Give Advice. And you know, all the current advice on giving advice is don't. Now, I want to be clear, I don't say never give advice, but I want you to make it a last resort. So in this webinar, we'll first look at 10 reasons not to give advice. So I want you to have a good, clear rationale on why you want to slow down your natural instinct to jump in and offer solutions, suggestions, and so on. So we'll look at 10 reasons why not to do that first up. Then I'm going to speak with you about what you can do instead, because you might go, oh my goodness, if I'm not going to, what will I do instead? So I'm going to give you some options there. And as I said, I don't say never give advice, just be slow with it. Make it the thing you have in your back pocket if you need it. So I'm going to talk about when you do need to give advice, when it's appropriate to give advice. So how you do it well. So that's our agenda for today. And believe me and forgive me, it's not lost on me, the irony of this, that all this adds up to me giving you advice. So I'll beg your forgiveness in advance for that. But I guess in a way, that's what you're here for, the information that I've got to share with you. So it's really easy to argue that people seek a mentor because they want advice. And they'll tell you this, they want some advice. So it's true. But it's also true that often giving advice is the least helpful thing you can do for them. Not giving advice is difficult to swallow because you're naturally action-oriented. Your work probably requires you to solve problems, come up with solutions quickly, and make decisions. You're probably a manager used to directing and organising others, but mentoring takes a different approach. And once again, I need to emphasize, it's not that mentors never give advice, but the best ones make it a last resort. So here are 10 reasons why. I'll run through them each, and then I'll give you a summary at the end so you can take a screenshot if you want to of the summary. So sometimes people just want to vent. They don't want advice. You know, have you ever chatted with a friend or a loved one and told them about the challenges you've had? When with the words barely out of your mouth, they started telling you what you should have done, what they would have done, or what your next move must be. Recall that experience and how you felt. And if you can't remember a time like that, notice your inner response next time it happens, because it definitely will happen. It's kind of our natural instinct, our automatic response when someone is telling us, you know, something troublesome. But do remember, everybody needs to vent at some time or another. We need to tell others about experiences, good and bad. You know, we talk about the need to let off steam or to get it off our chest, but that doesn't mean we need solutions. People are not always seeking help. They may simply need to be heard. Sometimes we need to be validated, to feel that what we're thinking and feeling is completely normal. And just remember, you can type in a response or an observation anytime if you're on the live call here. Now, here's something you may not have thought about. But giving advice implies they're incompetent. That's why we can sometimes get our backs up when people jump in and start giving us advice when we didn't ask for it and really don't want it. It implies that people are incompetent, and it can be very demotivating. Telling people what to do suggests that they don't know or can't figure out, or lack the capability to do something different to get a better result. That's why it can feel almost insulting when people give unsolicited advice. It's different when you go to a doctor or a lawyer or a landscape gardener, for that matter. You're paying for expert advice and you're seeking professional input in a field you know less about. Payment for advice balances the relationship, so it's different to our mentoring relationship. Another thing is advice can be perceived as criticism and lead to self-justification and resistance. Have you experienced this? You sort of make these suggestions and people say, oh, yes, but no, I and they start making all these defensive reasons and so on and so forth. You give advice because you want to help. You want the person to know that what they can do or what they can change to get a better outcome, but it usually backfires. When someone tells us we need to do something different, we often subconsciously feel we're being told we're wrong, or we're being told we're bad or stupid. And that's it's a childish response, true. It probably comes from our childhood experiences, that different status that we had back then. But that's how it feels. It's that sort of primitive feeling. And it's linked to this because when we feel judged, so if we feel we're being told we're wrong, we're bad, we're stupid, that's the equivalent of being judged. When we're feeling judged and defensive, it's a barrier to communication. Judgment is one of the most threatening feelings there is, and it usually causes us to become defensive. Now, you're probably aware, we talk about the fight, flight, freeze response. So when we feel threatened and our brain thinks there's a threat there, and an emotional threat is every bit as frightening to our brains as a physical threat. And what it instinctively causes is this fight, flight, freeze. So fight is resistance. We tend to argue or justify ourselves or even go on the attack. We flight, we change the subject, we leave, or we ignore. The shutters come down. You've got teenage kids, you ever seen the shutters go down when you start doling out parental advice? I have. Or we freeze, the kind of rabbit in the headlights, shut down, unable to move, think, respond. Ever had that situation where you think, why didn't I say that? Why didn't I say that? In the moment, you were in the freeze part of this automatic response. And any of these reactions severely limit communication. And we're all about, in mentoring, it's all about communication. It's all about the two-way conversation. That's what we want. Another thing, number 5, advice shifts the power dynamic in the relationship. In mentoring, we strive to have an open and balanced relationship where adults with neither exercising power over the other. So you'll have to excuse me, I've got my kitty cat here and he's trying to exert some power over me. Just stopped him walking over the keyboard, so that's a bonus. We'll see how we go here. In giving advice, one is kind of taking control and thus gains a higher status. Now, again, this is a subtle, almost unconscious response. But as soon as you give advice, instead of having this equal relationship, there's a split here, there's a change, and one has more status than the other. And when you lower the status of the other, it also lowers their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their self-efficacy. That is that feeling of mastery and control and the ability to do things themselves. And that feeling that we can achieve our goals and overcome setbacks, master tasks. And, the brain constantly scans for threats and also unconsciously weighs our status in relation to other people. Another reason to just hold your fire with giving advice is you don't have all the information. You can't possibly know all the facts of the situation, let alone all the background thoughts, feelings, or life experience of people involved. Your point of view is based on the information you have. And I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just limited. It's based on the little bit you know, and your own life experience. And you don't have the entire story. And you know, in life, there are very few simple, clear-cut cause and effect problems. Most have multiple interconnected variables. Now, we understand people are unique, and we have to keep this in mind, because what works for you might not work for them. What you would or could do in a situation depends on a whole range of factors, but you're not them. You've got your life experience. You've got, you know, your place in the world. There are things you could do comfortably. Things you could do that would be respected and effective with certain people. But if someone else did those very same things, they might not have the same result. So they don't necessarily see the world the way you see it. They have their own personality, their own knowledge and skills, and their needs and their values are not the same as yours. What we're doing is we mentor people because we want to empower them. I know it's a bit of a buzzword and some people don't like it, but it literally means assisting them in some way to develop their own power, their own autonomy, their own independence. The last thing we want to do is make a clone of ourselves out of them. So reason number 8, not to jump in quickly with advice, is because when you tell them what to do, you're robbing them of the opportunity to learn and grow. If you give people solutions that short circuits that problem solving, because some of the most important ways of developing is by figuring things out. And you can do that in a conversation where they're bouncing off you, where they're coming up with ideas, they're not being judged, they're literally bouncing back to them and giving them more ability to reflect and think things through. Next month, we're talking about developing better thinking. So this is the way you do it, by bouncing back to them. We also learn and develop when we think, what if? Well, what if this happened? And what if that happened? And what if I did this? And what if I did that? And that is a great way, using our imagination to visualize and come up with scenarios and think these things through. And consider options. The more options you have, the more empowered you are. You have choices, and you can weigh them up and make those choices for yourself. Another thing you can get your mentees to do, and I always say to mentors, you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, you don't have to have any answers. What you do need is the skill to help the mentee go and find their own answers. So give them research projects, you know, ask them to look for answers and bring that information back. And then they're in a position to make informed decisions, because your conversation is about the information that they've actually gathered for themselves. You can certainly point them in the direction. You can let them know what resources are available within the organisation, outside the organisations, you know, what learning networks there might be that they can tap into to find out what they need. And then they bring it back, and your conversation is enabling them to make decisions and make plans to use that. So if you provide solutions, it short circuits their problem solving process. And this is what we all need these days. We need to have really well developed ways of solving problems, because problems are never going to go away by themselves. We need to be able to work through and come up with good solutions ourselves autonomously. And it's like that old saying you've heard hundreds of times: if you give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. When you teach them how to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. So we're helping them to learn problem-solving processes that they will use throughout their lives in so many different situations. It gives them a sense of mastery. It strengthens them because they feel more confident and more competent. Reason number 9 not to give advice is it can build dependence and reduce self-responsibility. It's quite unhealthy when people don't have the opportunity to think for themselves, when they run to you. And if you're a manager, you know, you've experienced these people constantly. They're so insecure. They're running to you all the time to tell them what to do. They won't figure it out for themselves, or they need your validation for their decisions. Now, if this happens with your mentee, they remain tethered to you. They'll feel very little satisfaction with results, and worse, they may blame you when things don't work out because they don't make the decisions. They won't take responsibility. They won't have ownership, and there will be little commitment to those plans, which becomes a problem later on when we need motivation. We need our mentees to be motivated to follow through with their plans. The bottom line, the final reason to be slow to give advice is you're not the one who's got to face the consequences here. The bottom line is that we each must take responsibility for our own choices and actions. That's what being an adult means. We recognize that decisions have consequences, behavior produces results, inaction has ramifications too. So what you don't do has an effect as well. And you as a mentor can't dictate what they should do. They have to use their own best judgment because they have to live with the outcomes. So in summary, there are 10 reasons not to give advice. I'm going to pause for your comments and questions. I'll read out a few that might be there. Oh, Al has shared to everyone, telling my sons when I was your age. Yes, I'm guilty too. I'm sure people could put their hands up and say the same thing. Kathy, good suggestion from Kathy. Always good to ask, are you looking for me to give you advice here or just to listen? This has helped me with my adult daughter. That's really lovely. Thanks for sharing. And I always notice that learning these skills is really so useful in so many aspects of our personal life as well as mentoring. They are good communication skills. So thanks for pointing that one out. And you'll see later on when I talk about how to do advice well, one of the things to do is actually ask permission to give advice. And this is what Kathy's saying. Always good to ask, are you looking for me to give you advice here or just to listen? And Sharon is echoing that and saying, yeah, she had the same to her college age daughter. And Helen is saying, is sharing your experience giving advice by proxy? I think it is, but I think it's a really good way to give advice. But in order to have them listen to your experience, they need to feel really well heard. You need to be able to tell the story very succinctly, and you need to show, to be able to highlight those bits that are the relevant bit, and maybe, summing up by, so what I learned from that was blah, blah, blah. And then it's up to them. Again, we'll talk in the third section about how to give advice, but you sort of put it out there and it is their option to pick that up and take it or not. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Al's talking about the IT help desk here, and I always and I mean, sometimes that's just the most efficient, effective way to get a solution to your problem, and that is what they're there for. So it's a good use. I know my daughter does complain. She's not a help desk person, but she's kind of a go-to person. She's developed a bit of a reputation for herself. And, you know, I guess that she enjoys it in a sense, but it's not a designated part of her role, and it then takes her time from what is her role. And so my tendency is, and I've got some go-to people, but now I have a little rule. And I go, okay, let's Google this, or let's go to YouTube and have a look and see if I can figure this out before I go to. And the funny thing is, the more you figure out, and we're talking in relation to computers and stuff like that here, rather than mentoring, but I do find the more you figure out, the easier it becomes to figure out, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Sandra, can I come back to your question at the end, because it's a good question. I just want to continue with the content now and make sure I cover everything. So thanks for that. So I now want to talk about what to do instead of jumping in with advice. So a reminder here, this idea of not jumping in too quickly with advice will work for you in all your relationships. Just notice two things for homework. Notice when you're kind of venting to a loved one or a trusted colleague and they jump in with advice, just notice how that makes you feel. And also, second part, better still, notice when it's on the tip of your tongue to jump in there with a suggestion, a solution, or a you should, you must, blah, blah, I would have. Catch yourself before it comes off the tip of your tongue and out your mouth, and hold it back. And instead, you know, nod, give that attentive, non-verbal communication that you're listening, you're interested, but you're holding back on your words to let them have their say, and just watch the blossoming of relationships. Beware, you might become the go-to person as well. So what you need to do is make sure if someone comes to you with an issue, you listen. You use things like minimal response. So that's the nodding, Tell me a little bit more about that. So it is showing, literally showing your attentiveness so that they feel heard. You don't say too much. Your minimal responses are encouraging them to keep talking. You might do a little gentle probing. Do you mind if I asked, or can you tell me some more about that? And when that happened, what led up to that? The idea is you want to keep them talking. You want them to feel really heard. And then you use your reflective listening. So it sounds to me like, and then you encapsulate what it is they've said in a few words. And that gives them the chance to clarify, oh, no, that's not really what I meant, because often the first thing that comes out of our mouth isn't, you know, what's really going on. It just happened to come out of our mouths. So that you're helping them to think it through and clarify, or to validate your understanding. So they say, yeah, exactly, you get me, that's good. So they feel heard. Now, last month, we went into the model of the mentoring conversation. And if you missed that and you're watching this one, just go back to YouTube and it's up there for you in detail. So I'm not going to go through this model in detail, except to say in the beginning of your mentoring conversation, it's even more important, because in the beginning of your mentoring conversation, and I'm looking at, the 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock position up here in the model, when we're trying to find out where they are now, we are exploring their thoughts and their feelings before we get into the goal setting and the planning to take us forward. We really want them to reflect on their current reality, what's going on from their point of view, their perspective on the situation. And a person's perception, how they see the world and events in their life, is shaped by their thoughts and their feelings and their previous experience and imagination. So it's important to start with what's going on for them. We might see it differently. It's not our job to put our perspective at this time. It's our job to make them feel heard and to let them express themselves fully. So how to do this? Well, you might begin with something like, what's on your mind today? And you want to get them started and you want to draw them out. Now, this is not a 1 minute manager type thing. You don't want to rush them. You need to give them time. You want to allow pauses and indeed silence so that they can, because they might need to go deep to bring out what's really on their mind. It mightn't be top of mind, it might be lower down. You want to show that you are respectfully curious, you are interested, and you need to demonstrate that you're not going to judge them, you're not going to critique what they say, you're simply going to listen. And you demonstrate what you think is not important at this stage. Later on, you'll have an opportunity if it's relevant. And it's about them bringing up information into their conscious awareness and regard their first comments as the tip of the iceberg, because below the surface, as you see from this picture, there's a lot more below the surface, and all their emotions, their beliefs, their assumptions, that's all below the surface, and they may not even be aware of what's going on down there. And they're frequently subconscious, and yet they are really strong drivers of people's behaviour. So you get to that by asking questions like, what makes this important to you? And then again, you're using reflective listening. So you're a sounding board. They're bouncing off you. You're reflecting back to them, summarising or paraphrasing what you're hearing. There's likely several different values and beliefs at play. And, sometimes we have values and beliefs that are in conflict with each other. For example, they might have a strong desire to do a good job, but deadlines and pressure from above force them to cut corners and do work that is less than perfect. So are they trying to be perfect? Are they have kind of an attitude of perfectionism, but they've got too much pressure on them to do the job in that perfect way? So that's a problem for them. So the other thing is, I want you to keep this in mind, when a person seeks mentoring, it's because they want something to improve in their life. Now, I spoke earlier very much about they might need to vent their frustrations or express their unhappiness or lament their circumstances, and you want to listen to that and let them get it off their chest. But you can't let them wallow in self-pity. This is not a pity party. Sooner or later, you're going to lead the conversation towards what they want instead of the current situation, so that you can decide, or so that they can decide what to do. So in the model I showed you earlier, there's 4 kind of distinct phases to that. You don't necessarily always work your way in that clockwise fashion around. You may go backwards and forwards, but at some point in time, you as the mentor are leading the conversation, and you will lead them that step forward towards what they want instead of what's going on now. And then you can start to get them talking about what they want and then what they can do differently to achieve that. So you don't let them, you do let them vent, but only up to a point. And your good judgment, your experience will tell you when it's time to make that step, and never let them go away having all they've done is, sort of this misery thing. At least they need to go away with some optimism, even if you won't necessarily have, they won't necessarily have solved the problem, and you may not have time to do everything in one conversation, obviously, but you do need to have them go away knowing they've come, you've listened, and you're there for them to help them work this out, even if the mechanics of that don't even begin until the next time you talk. Okay, remember you can comment, ask questions at any time, and I'll pause in just a moment to look at those again. So when it's time to make that step forward into the next phase, you want to identify their goals or preferred outcomes for the situations. Now, don't shift gears too quickly. They need to have had enough time to thoroughly articulate what's on their mind. But when you do gauge the time is right, you summarize the issue, so encapsulated. So it sounds to me, da-da. Okay, so I think I have a general understanding of what's going on for you. So now let's kind of explore what would be different in an ideal world. What would you like instead? So however way you want to phrase that, it's a transition phase, but you are moving from looking back to looking forward. Where are you going to go now? Where are you now? Where do you want to be is the second question. So part of that will be clarifying the issues affecting the situation. Life is complicated, and there's many factors and circumstances that influence people's behaviour and their perceptions and results. And there's very seldom a single cause and effect relationship. More often, there's a whole bunch of interactive elements that produce a situation that's the subject of your conversation. So you want to tease those out a little bit, because there may be nothing you can do about this one, nothing you can do about that one, but plenty you can do about this and this and this. And so your positive moving forward is saying, okay, here are some things we can do something with. Let's go away and think about what might be some options in these areas, and that can be our agenda for the next meeting. And you might get to that by saying, well, what do you think are the major influences on this situation? What are some of the factors involved in there? They might come up with one or two things, and you keep probing. What else might be a factor? What else might be a factor? Then you're going to explore options, help them find viable alternatives to achieve their preferred outcome. And you might say something like, well, let's brainstorm some ideas about what you might do to change this situation. And it's not that you're going to acknowledge in every situation there are things you can control and things you can't control. You want to acknowledge those things that are beyond a person's scope of control, and you want to focus their energy on the things they can do something about, so they don't feel helpless and hopeless. And a good way of thinking about this is the traffic light system. So get them to identify what they could stop doing, what they could do differently. The amber light would do something differently, and the green light are new things they could start doing. So you could frame your brainstorming, your joint brainstorming around these three questions. Of course, then they have to think about this, give them time to go away and think about which, once you come up with a brainstorm, a list of options, alternative, maybe that's a good time to let them go away and have some time to think this through and come back, task them to come back with, okay, you've got this, a list. We haven't critiqued this list. I'll leave that with you for a little while to think about which of these might be viable options. And of the viable options, what might be your priorities? And of those priorities, which things, how might you do those things? How might you implement those? And I'm here for you next time to be a sounding board for you so you can work that out. We can work it out together. And finally, you want to get commitment to their next steps. Have them summarize their actions. You want an action plan. You want a time frame. You can be very helpful to them in sorting out a time frame. There are some things they can do will be instant game changers, but mostly it's a number of step by step actions, and they need to be realistic about how long this will take. Not every step's going to work, and they need to know you're there for them to kind of debrief that and look at whether it's, do I need to persist or do I need to try something different? So you might say something to them about when you're going to review their progress next time you meet, and you might say something to them to get this commitment. So what are the things you'll do before we meet next? So quick summary, and then I'll stop for questions if you want to start typing. Instead of giving advice, firstly, you elicit, draw out from them, what are their thoughts and feelings about the situation they've come to you with. Focus on their values and needs regarding this situation. Identify their goals or preferred outcomes for the situation. And this might not happen in one conversation. You might just be dealing with the tip of the iceberg in the first conversation and get them to go away, and the second conversation takes it a bit further. Identify their goals, preferred outcomes. Clarify the issues impacting on the situation. Help them learn. And as I said, next month is building good thinking skills. And this is part of that. Multiple issues impacting on the situation. Exploring the options, the possible alternatives to achieve what they want in future. Discuss the actions. Use the traffic light, stop, do differently, or go, move forward, do something new, and get that commitment to next steps. Now, they don't have to have a full-blown plan, and it's not written in stone. You need that flexibility. But each meeting, your mentee should go away with something they're going to do. It might be research. It might be simply thinking and reflecting. It might be to take what you've covered and come back to you with an agenda for your next meeting, what they want to take forward or take further. Okay. And Ron and Jackie, I think, okay. So I will take, let me see, how am I going for time? I'm spot on time. So let's have a look at a couple of these questions. Now, there's two questions here. Sandra's question from before, how do you approach a mentor when the person is given unwelcome advice? So Sandra, if you're there, can you clarify for me, do you mean a mentor has kind of given you as a mentee unwelcome advice, or are you intervening on behalf of the mentee to a mentor who's in maybe the mentor? Okay. Yeah. Now, this is really common, Sandra. Mentors often come into a mentoring program with the traditional idea. In fact, I'm going to that on my next slide as we move forward and think about what to do when you do give advice. And here I'm showing a diagram from my book called The Mentoring Dynamic, and it shows the starting point traditionally is that a mentor is there to give advice, to share their knowledge and their experience and impart that wisdom to the mentee. And it is part of the mentoring model. It's just not our first step now. But a lot of people come into mentoring with this idea that that is their role. If you're managing a program or leading a program of some description, this is why it's so important that mentors have training for their role and are exposed to these different models of mentoring that say, hey, your role is to be slow with your advice. It's not to jump in there with solutions, because you can't blame a mentor for going to their default position. It's a human, our idea as being helpful, our default goes, okay, well, let's give them a solution. So it's natural. They're not wrong, they're not bad. It's just not helpful in a mentoring situation. So my suggestion would be education. And you may be overt and direct with this. If you are, in fact, a director of the program, a leader, a manager of the program, you can provide some sort of training or some sort of forum for your mentors, and maybe a discussion with other mentors who don't leap to giving advice, a discussion with a group of mentors would allow that suggestion to come from the group rather than necessarily from you directing them. You can provide other resources to them. You can, go find some short videos. I've got some on my website, but I'm sure there's many more out there. Short videos that talk about this. You can provide journal articles. You can provide, dare I promote my books, a book or a magazine or something like that. You can, depending on where you are, there are going to be conferences on mentoring. In the United States, there's the International Mentoring Association, have an annual conference. In the Philippines, I know many of you are over there, and a couple of the universities run mentoring conferences over there. So you might be able to get yourself to one of these conferences, let people know that you're going, and offer a debrief. I know one of the most effective ways for an individual to get the most out of a conference, and an organisation to get value on their investment in sending that person to a conference, is that person then comes back and shares what they learned at that conference. So it really is a matter of education for that mentor. And if they need the awareness first, the acceptance that they're not wrong, they're just going to their default and there is a better way. They need to accept that, and then they need to acquire the skills of doing it differently. And this webinar will be up on YouTube. I've got to go out straight after this, but early next week it will be up there on YouTube, so you can certainly let your people know if they're interested and want to see this and get some ideas. Okay, thanks for that question, Sarah. Now, I just want to go back. Oh, sorry, Sandra, I beg your pardon. I just want to go back to Ron and Jackie. What is the best way to correct the relationship when there has been an overstep of advice given over a period of time? The mentee is a teenager. Should the mentor apologise for not handling the conversation properly? Now, I've got two kind of different thoughts on this. One is sometimes an apology is really useful, but I see on the television too often people giving what I call faux apologies, which is I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. That's not an apology. That's a faux apology. I'm sorry I offended you is an apology. Now, if you're comfortable and you think it will be effective, you might be able to say, I'm sorry that in the past perhaps I've given a bit too much advice or been a bit too quick. with advice. I'm now trying to rein that in. You could use that, and you really need to show that you're making that demonstrate that you are making that effort. You need to be careful. What you want is to retain your credibility as a person. So you don't want to be too self-deprecating. There's a difference between modesty and what am I trying to say here? Kind of going too far so that you sort of lower your status in their eyes. What we want is an equality here. So it's good to show you're human, and you're the only one who can judge this situation. So I'll bow to that. You need to think about this and work out for yourself. But are they going to respect you for an apology? And is that going to improve your relationship and allow you to go forward in a better way? Or do you just need to change your behavior? Just hold back, just continue the conversations and demonstrate a different way of doing things. There's been 2 people already who've talked about either their college age or adult offspring and have employed these sorts of techniques. So scroll back and have a look at those. Nicole's got a great suggestion here. Could you say that you are continuing to learn about how best to mentor and would like to try a different approach with the mentoring? Brilliant. Thank you, Nicole. That's a great suggestion there. And okay, who's asking this? Okay, I think this is just looking at this other question. I think this is Sandra again. What can be said in the conversation to bring the mentor back to mentoring instead of the traditional way? Using questions. There's the 2 parts to this. It's the listening and it's the asking questions. So let me continue with content here because I want to share this model and a little bit more before we finish up. So this is the traditional way of looking at mentorings, the older, wiser, so on, imparting their knowledge and experience. And I'm not saying don't do that. It has a place. It is, in a way, it's kind of the foundation of mentoring, but it's not the first place. Instead, we start with this idea of elicit, and that means drawing them out, getting them talking and keeping them talking. And we do that by asking questions and really listening. And I've got webinars on both those things in more detail coming up for you this year. But having a repertoire of questions and being able to ask them in ways that do not feel like an interrogation, in ways that feel like, I'm really interested in you, I care, I want to know more, what you think is important, and I'm going to listen to that. Can you hear the kookaburras behind me? I got trees out there, and I don't know what you hear, what you call a group of kookaburras sitting out there, but they make a lot of noise. Okay, so I want you to see this diagram as a dynamic. That's why I called it the mentoring dynamic. You'll see it in the book. And the arrows, it's not either or, it's elicit and impart, and you will move and you will flow. It's kind of like a dance, and your skill and your experience and your judgment will allow you to move and flow. Likewise, on the other dimension of this, support, our role is to provide support to our mentee. We want to encourage them and validate them. That's what makes them feel heard. That's what encourages them. That's what builds the relationship. And with that foundation, it then allows you, when it is time to do so, to share your knowledge and experience, and indeed to challenge them. You know, if we're in our comfort zone all the time, we don't grow. It's only when we get a challenge that takes us outside of our comfort zone. And you can do that by providing a different perspective. Each of us has our own way of looking at the situation. And part of your job is, as a mentor, is to share a different way of looking when and if it's appropriate to do so. I'm seeing some new messages coming. I'll pause in a moment for that. So what we want to do with a conversation is have our mentee make informed decisions for themselves. An informed decision, by definition, rests on information, good information. Where does it come from? Well, some of that information comes from within. Okay, they look inside themselves. They look to their values. They look to their needs. They look to their wants. Maybe in your mentoring, they do some sort of personality profile, or better yet, a strengths assessment, which will enable them, and when they share that with you, a whole wealth of information about them that they can apply in getting what they want from work, from life, and these situations. So some of that information will come from within them. Some information is from external resources. I'm a big fan of establishing what they need to know. Before you ever start telling them, send them off to find out. Maybe from other experts whose brain they can pick, maybe from other resources, you know, books or journal articles, or other sort of research that they can do. So external to them and external to you. And then and only then might you start to give information from yourself, from your own experience, from your own thoughts and your own knowledge. When do you give advice? The time to share your knowledge and experience is after you've drawn out their knowledge. So you've had this conversation, you've elicited, you've drawn out their knowledge, and you've noticed gaps. So there's information they don't have, there's knowledge they don't have, there's experience they don't have, there's a gap between what they know and maybe what they need to know. So you've noticed the gap. You maybe have important and relevant information that will make a difference. Now, there's no denying you've got tons of knowledge and experience, but what is relevant to them in this particular context? So you only step in and share when you know you've got something really relevant to offer. And it's appropriate to share something that they might not otherwise learn. So this is where, and someone talked about it earlier, giving advice by proxy, where you share your experience. I had this particular situation in my life. This is what I did, and this is what happened as a result. And from that, I learned, and maybe this was not the thing to do, or an alternative way of whatever. So tell your story succinctly, A, B, C. A is the sort of antecedent. This is what happened. This is what I did. And then this was the consequence. Okay. When you do choose to give advice, ask permission, own your own beliefs and perspective, and offer it on a plate. Don't impose it on them. Empower them through options and choices. Let me tell you what I mean by this. So you ask permission. So have your own phrases ready there in your toolkit, and it might be something like, may I make a suggestion? And genuinely pause. Very infrequently will they say, no, you can't. They've come to you. You've already held back from giving advice for a long time. So when you say, may I make a suggestion? Or you could say, would you like me to share my observations? And again, genuinely pause and allow the space. Or you might say something like, well, I've got a different take on that. Are you open to hearing it? You're pre-warning them that you see it differently, so they know what to expect. The second part of this is you need to own your own opinions. And I suggest you come up with a whole range of your own examples on this. There's a lot in the book, but you need to have your own repertoire of phrases that you feel comfortable with and your mentee. It's kind of the language, the phrasing that will work with them. It's important to own our own beliefs and opinions or views because they're based on what we've been taught or the information we have access to and the way our personal experience and preconceived ideas and assumptions shape our thinking. We must recognize that opinions, beliefs or views are not necessarily true or false, even when they're based on facts. Frequently, we form our ideas with many influences at play. It's useful to preface our statements to signal that you are offering your opinion or stating a belief or a point of view. So you, again, a range of phrases, things like, in my opinion, or it might be, I believe, I think, I feel, and then you make your statement. You're not saying it's true, it's false, it's right, it's wrong. You're showing them it's a belief, it's an opinion, it's your thoughts, it's your feelings. Or you might say, well, from my point of view, and then you state the way you see it. So a key to giving advice is to offer it and not impose it. So if you've asked permission and they've said yes, and then you've prefaced it with this is a point of view, or this is your thoughts, and so on and so forth, which implicitly suggests there are other ways of seeing it. You then make your advice one of several options. Remember, we're wanting to empower them, and the more options or choices you have, within reason, is empowering. So you might, again, have a repertoire of phrases that you use. Well, one way to handle this might be X, Y, Z. Another tactic could be blah, blah, blah. Or it might even be, well, let's brainstorm some different ways to deal with this. Now, notice the words may, could, and might. And this terminology, again, implies possibility and alternatives rather than instruction. It's not just what you say, it's the way that you say it. And finally, before I wrap up here, it's useful to understand, and this comes from Daniel Pink's brilliant book, Drive. If you haven't read it, it's one that definitely should be on your bookshelf. It's so valuable. And he points out what people are really, in fact, I think that's a subtitle, what really motivates people. And people are motivated by autonomy, purpose, and mastery. And they're more committed to actions of their choice. So autonomy means the freedom to do what they want to do, to have those choices. Purpose is having a goal, a reason, a mission, if you like. And mastery comes back to that feeling of self-efficacy. I can do this. Look what I did in that situation. Look what I've overcome. Look what I've done to get me to where I am here. I can master this too. And that is what motivates people. More to say about that in a later webinar. The final thing that you want to do with your mentees, remember, you are empowering them. They are going to make the choices of what actions they will take. You might not agree with some of them. So you need to have a conversation about possible consequences of action and inaction. So if you don't do anything, what is going to happen? If you do option number one, what are possible outcomes or consequences? Not only the consequences you want, but could there be unintended consequences? Could there be negative consequences? And how will you handle those? And that is the content for today. In summary, we talked about 10 reasons not to give advice. We talked about what you can do instead, and recognizing that there is a place for advice sometimes. Sometimes people will just work it out for themselves, and all you need to do is provide that support. They'll have the insight, they'll come up with the action themselves, they'll map it out with your support, and that's all you need to do. But other times your input will be highly important and valued. So if you're going to do it right. That's our content for today. I hope you have got a lot from that. I'm going to stick around and answer your questions. We are a little over time. I do apologise for that. Thanks for sticking around if you're still here. Do share if you wish your key takeaways. Reminder, we've got more webinars coming up this year. If you're not on the live webinar, if you're watching the recording, please contact me and I'll put you on the list so that you'll receive invitations to the live webinars. I will send you information about advanced mentoring skills. All of today's content came from that book. I'll also pop a link in for that book if you're interested in that, so that you can purchase that if you'd want to. There you go, in the chat. And yeah, I'm going to stick around to hear from you and respond to your questions right now. I will stop the recording. So if you are on the recording, thanks for watching and listening, and hopefully I'll see you on a live recording sometime soon. If you're on the live, stick around and I will